Greetings, Internet Baseball fans. 4Friends1679 here, the baseball blogger with the most dad name on the Internet. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about how the players are selected, what the process is, what the stats are that I'm using, because I'm using stats. Because this is not a recipe site, I'm not going to tell you my life story or make you sit through the long explanation. First, I'm going to get to the chase up front. They're selected based on career WAR.
You're not buying into this Bill James bullshit, are you?
Yes, Rocky, I am. That's the spoiler here. They're ranked and selected and populated into the rosters based on maximizing career WAR. There are three kinds of people in the world, and I'm aware of all three. Those who love WAR, this is all about you. I don't need to speak to you any further. Go and check out the blog, alltimeteams.blogspot.com. Look for the team videos when they come up and other things that we'll be discussing. There are those who hate WAR. That's fine. There's still a lot we can talk about. Don't bother wasting your time telling me how you think it's made up, bullshit, blah, 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 all that stuff. You know what? I get it. I know you're out there. I don't agree with you. I don't take your analytical abilities very seriously. That's on me, whatever. But there's still a lot we can talk about, and I still want to get your input. And then finally, there are those people that don't even know what I'm talking about when I say WAR. That, of course, stands for wins above replacement. There will be another video made to explain what that's all about. That'll be at another time, though. This video, basically, so there you go. They're selected based on career WAR. That's my method. I don't want to necessarily make this into a defense of WAR as a statistic, but I do want to explain why I use it, because there are reasons that I got to this point with that stat. I started the blog, alltimeteams.blogspot.com, back in 2009. At the time, I was just selecting subjectively. I just decided to pick my favorite guys, make a team out of them, you know, have some fun with it. And there's a few problems with that. One of the big problems at the time for the original 16 franchises, you know, excluding the expansion teams, I actually made two teams, two rosters, 40-man rosters per team, classic and modern. The difference being sometime in the 1950s, either when the team moved, like from New York to Brooklyn, New York to San Francisco, Boston to Milwaukee, whatever, or just cutting it off at 1960 and having from 1960 to today, from 1959 back, and an all-time team, you know, in each time period. It got I got the complaint quite a few times. Too many players. I don't give about half these guys. You know, it's just too much. And I agreed with that, and I pared it down to just one 40-man roster for each franchise. Now, part of the problem with trying to pick teams subjectively is that I am a fan of exactly one team, a true fan of exactly one team. You might have guessed what it is by now. I'm not a fan of the Reds. I'm not a fan of the Phillies. I'm not a fan of the Pirates or the Marlins. I couldn't tell you who the all-time Marlins are. I don't know. And not dunking on the Marlins, simply acknowledging my own shortcomings here. I don't really care. I care enough to make a blog, but I don't really care enough to get to know the team as well as I know the Red Sox. I could do an all-time team off the top of my head for the Red Sox. 99% of fans would be satisfied with that. Because I'm a Red Sox fan and I love them as much as I do, I know the Yankees well enough to probably do the same for the Yankees. If you love the Red Sox, you know the Yankees. And I've lived in Michigan now for 25 years, so I can do it for the Tigers. But beyond that, I can't relate to the players the way that a fan of that franchise would. I can't tell you how a fan would relate to my picks for the Phillies. And also, if they told me I was wrong, who might argue with a fan about who the greatest, you know, Pirates are? I'm nobody. I would be wrong. That's not even subjective. If somebody's going to try to lecture me about who the greatest Red Sox are and they're speaking nonsense, you know, I'm right, they're wrong, because I'm a fan. However, if you're going to do something that is more defensible, you would pick statistically, and that's what I started to do instead, was to pick based on stats. Now, I didn't immediately go to WAR. I was looking at career records, all-time leader lists, you know, who's in the Hall of Fame, who's numbered to retire, all that kind of stuff, and still trying to make a roster that is based on kind of judgments. And there were a couple things that happened. One, again, getting back to the idea that I'm not a fan, eventually I would get down to like who the, you know, I'd get like a four-way tie for the third best second baseman in Reds history. I have no idea who that would be, and I'd have all these guys. And I'm trying to pick. I can't pick like a fan because I'm not a fan. I don't know who the fans would love to see and who their favorite players are. But picking statistically didn't help either, because what do you do when you have this guy hits a lot of home runs, this guy hits for batting average, this guy had a long career, this guy had a short career, this guy's great with defense, this guy steals bases, this guy played in the dead ball era, this guy played in modern era, all these different things. And there's biases. We all have biases. Biggest bias, offense over defense. And I'll show you what I'm talking about there. If I show you a stat line like this, this is a good hitter. Like, I don't need to tell you anything else. I don't even need to tell you what these numbers are. You know by looking at them what they are, and you know that this is a good hitter. And I don't need to tell you what season it came from, what team he played for, or anything. Because in any year, in any era, this is a good stat line. It's Triple Crown stat lines. These are actually the Triple Crown stat lines of Miguel Cabrera's Triple Crown season. I didn't need to tell you that, though. You can look at that and say, that's a good hitter. I don't need to know anything else. On the other hand, look at this. Now, do you have any idea what you're looking at? Putouts, assists, errors, double plays, fielding percentage. That's what you're looking at. But does this mean anything to you? You know what it tells me? It tells me this guy's probably a middle infielder, because I've looked at enough defensive stats. I know that first basemen tend to get over 1,000 putouts. Third basemen don't have nearly as many putouts. Outfielders have hundreds of putouts and only single digits of assists and double plays. This is probably a middle infielder. But is he any good? I don't know. Offense is very easy to appreciate by looking at a very small amount of numbers in them. You immediately get a feeling for the hitter. But this doesn't tell me anything. Now, this happens to be Ryne Sandberg's 1984 season. Was he good? Yeah, he was pretty good. But you would never know that looking at these numbers. So the defensive numbers don't tend to mean anything. And I do mean that. They don't actually... It's very hard to, even for people who look at this stuff all the time, to tell you if this was a good or a bad or a mediocre second baseman simply by looking at these numbers. So it's easy. We can get a good feeling about offense, and thus we value offense. The other thing is, how do you objectively compare a home run hitter versus a higher batting average hitter? And the answer is, some people like batting average, some people like power. I think more people tend to like power. We tend to be hypnotized by home runs. So we not only have a bias towards offense, but we have a bias towards whoever hits the most home runs. And in fact, inevitably, one of the most predictable things when somebody tells me, when they hear that I use Career WAR to pick everything, basically, they say, you shouldn't rely on one statistic. And inevitably, they pick the guy that has the most home runs. It's a common bias. We might have a bias towards people who played for or will in the future play for our favorite team. I don't know that I go out of my way to pick ex-Red Sox or future Red Sox, but that's a bias. You have a bias towards an era. For me, it's the 1980s. Not because I think 1980s baseball was better, but because I have a love of the players from that time period. That was the time period that I first started following baseball. So that's a bias we all have. Some people are biased towards the 50s and 60s, the golden era. So they would be more likely to pick players from that time. Some people are biased towards today because they have a feeling, and I think accurately, that the talent level has continued to improve. The training is better, the conditioning is better, sports medicine is better, nutrition is better, the science of the sport is more well understood. So the level of competition is harder today than it's ever been. So therefore the players today are better. And that's true, but I'm not necessarily picking the player who's better head to head necessarily. That's hard to actually suss out because it's not just, there are also players today have advantages that players in the past didn't have. So that's hard to say, but that's a bias. And if you're a real baseball hipster, maybe you have a bias for players from the 1800s. I don't know. A bias towards longer careers or shorter careers. Some people get sucked in by long careers. I'm probably one of those. I would probably have a bias that favors compilers, guys with these really long careers. Other people might want to see guys with shorter careers, but lots of black ink, lots of league leaders, all-stars, MVPs, those short, dominant careers. I might say the Sandy Koufax types, but there are guys that even were more dominant over shorter periods of time versus a guy with 10, 15, 20 years with the team who was good for 5 to 10 years, 6, 7 years maybe, and then otherwise was just mediocre and just run up, the hits and the doubles and maybe the RBIs and the runs scored because he just played a long time. This is your Tim Wakefield type for Boston. He was never like the ace pitcher, but he pitched for a long time with the team, so therefore he's like ranked in the top 5 in every category. He was a compiler. So that's another bias that I try to suss out. So one of the reasons that I like WAR, and this is kind of skipping to the end, but I'm going to come back to this again, is that it gives me a way to objectively compare, freeing all my biases and any other mood or feeling or just gut instinct out of it, taking my opinion out of it, my biases out of it. It gives me a way to objectively compare players with radically different skill sets, different career lengths from different eras. And the biggest part of that, again, is that it just puts offense and defense in the same units of wins, combines them, and now I can compare an Ozzie Smith type and an Alan Trammell type. You know, a guy who was definitely a better hitter, but not like maybe the best hitter, and a guy who definitely was the best fielder, but not a good hitter at all. And how do I know if this was good enough to overcome this other player's different skills? Well, WAR will give me a way of doing that. Even if you don't agree with how it's calculated, the fact that it is a benefit. The fact that somebody better than me took these numbers and turned that into an amount of runs prevented over a replacement player, which translates into a certain number of wins. I'll do a whole video on that. But it basically gives you an objective way of comparing offense and defense. And then finally, what I was finding that I was doing unconsciously as I would get down to that third string second baseman on the Phillies, and I don't know who it is, and to some extent I don't care because I'm not a fan, and so I have no emotional connection to a player, so I have no bias, but I'm trying to compare different stat blocks. I don't even know, and I'm just like, I could look at career ops plus, but like we talked, that's offensive bias as opposed to defensive bias. So what I was finding was that my tiebreaker at the bottom end, because obviously the first string guys all leap off the page at you. I'm not going to make a Phillies team, for example, without Mike Schmidt, Steve Carlton, Robin Roberts. You know, I'm not going to make a Tigers team without Al Kaline, Ty Cobb, Hal Newhouser. Like, some guys are just going to leap off the page at you. But when you're getting down to that, like, third string, third baseman for the Pirates, and again, Pirates fans are probably yelling at me right now, but I'm not a Pirates fan, so I don't know who that is. So I got 4 or 5 guys that all have different career lengths and different skill sets, different eras, and I don't know who to pick. So what I was doing was I was using career WAR to break the tie. And then I thought to myself, well, hello, I already know that these guys, these obvious guys at the top, are going to rise right to the top of the WAR lists. And I also know that I'm using WAR to break the tie at the bottom. So once I kind of realized that, I thought, well, wait a minute, you know what would be interesting is just to use WAR for the whole team. I get the guys at the top. I'm using to break the tie at the bottom anyway. It would be interesting to see how it's ranking the guys in the middle. To see if there's guys that I'm missing, that I'm overlooking, because that's the other thing, is we're biased towards the familiar. I'm more likely to pick a guy I've heard of than a guy I've not heard of. Why? Maybe I didn't hear about him just because he played a long time ago, but that doesn't mean he wasn't good. Okay? And that's the other thing, is that when people say, well, I've never heard of him, we're not quantifying greatness. Greatness is, who have you heard of? Who do you have great memories? Who do you have love for? Who inspires you? You know, who hit that big home run? That's greatness. When I say Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, I don't need to give you numbers. I don't need to tell you what their batting average was or how many home runs they hit. You hear Hank Aaron, and it's like, you know he's great. Okay? So we don't quantify that. But I don't have to give you statistics. If I'm statistically defending a guy, he's not great. But he could be really, really good. And that's what I'm ranking essentially with WAR, is who was good. Now, most of the great guys, in fact, you might say, oh, but there are guys who are great who actually weren't that good. And there is one perfect example of that, which I'm not going to spoil now, but when I get to that team, you'll see what I'm talking about. You think I'm crazy now to say that there could be a great player who wasn't good. It actually happens. But this is a way of saying, okay, who are the guys that I've never heard of, and why would I have? Because they played for a team I don't follow a long time ago in an era that I'm not familiar with. They could still have been really good. And WAR, when I run the report in StatHead, and I do use StatHead, so I'm using baseballreference.com's WAR calculation if anyone was wondering. When I rank all the players by WAR, I'm not missing anybody. I'm not missing somebody from a forgotten era or a forgotten period of time in that team's history or whatever, or just a guy that flew under the radar, but he did all of the things that make a player good. I'm not missing anybody. I get to rank everybody, and then it satisfies my curiosity. It becomes, what this whole project is a bit of a test of WAR and of how I've decided to construct the rosters, which will be a separate video entirely, because this one's getting a little bit long. But really, that was what my curiosity became, was if I made a team based on career war, what would it look like? And I want you to look at these with that in mind. Whether if you love war, if you hate war. If you love war, I'm sure you share my curiosity as to what the team might look like. But if you dislike war, if that's not your jam, if you don't like that as a statistic and you hate the new sabermetrics and all that, look at the teams and realize this is the team that it created. And there's going to be guys you disagree with. There are guys I disagree with, believe it or not. But I'll tell you, when you actually dig down and look closely at them with an open mind, then objectively you realize, well, maybe they're not your favorite guy, maybe that's not who you would pick, but they're pretty good. So anyway, that is kind of how I arrived at it. I was looking to eliminate my biases, compare players from different eras, different skill sets, different career lengths. And it's the other thing about war, it is a peak-weighted career stat. Compilers can generate a lot of war, but it's harder to, because they're only generating 1.5, 2, maybe 3 wins above replacement at their absolute peak. Whereas a really solid player could generate 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 win. It's been done, but 5 to 7 is like a really legend type player. Well, in 3 to 5 years, you can generate what a compiler can do in 10 to 15. So again, it says, did this guy do enough over this time period to justify sticking around that long, versus did this guy in a short period of time do enough to, unseat the compiler? It gives you, you can balance this out. So doing all of that, I don't miss any players. I find hidden gems, and some of these guys that I've never heard of, when I actually look at them, I'm like, wow, this guy was actually pretty good. All of that is, and the fact that I was using it as a tiebreaker anyway, is why I use career war, and ultimately a lot of what's going on here is a test of how well that statistic picks the team. So anyway, I hope you find this interesting. I hope you will look through the videos that I do on the actual teams when I'm done with them, and as I complete them. And I want to hear your feedback. I really do. I want to get comments on the blog, comments on the YouTube channels. Let me know what you think. And you know what? I'm going to respond to all comers. I'm not really, whether you hate war or love war, whatever, it doesn't really matter to me. You give me a player you'd rather see, I'll give him a look, and I'm not going to give you an answer like, well, I didn't pick him because he doesn't have the most career war. That might be the right answer, but it's not very satisfactory. So, yeah, I'll go through and I'll take a look, and I'll respond to that. That's kind of what I'm here for. So anyway, if that sounds interesting to you, if you think that you want to see these as they come up, hit the bell, like, subscribe, all that happy horse, and hope to hear from you. And in the meantime, see you at the ballpark.